Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome or welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. This week we are going to be finishing up our baby quilt top. This is the delightful desert sew-along that I've been doing for the past several weeks, and today is the day that we get to put it all together. Now you may notice on the design wall behind me that this is not any of the layouts that are in the pattern guide. And that's just because when I looked at my blocks and looked at the colors, I started moving things around and I decided some of these brighter colors, I just wanted to evenly disperse them throughout the quilt. And I wanted to kind of break up these browns between the fawn and the cottontail and the coyote. So now you can definitely switch blocks within the columns. You can't really switch the blocks between the columns. So it's like you can't put this one over here and this one over here, but you could just swap the order in which they're laying out in the columns. And that's what I've done. So this is the layout that I'm going to be using for my baby quilt. Make sure you go ahead and look at your blocks and decide which placement is great for your quilt. Okay, so there's two places in the pattern booklet that you're going to refer to in order to know what sashing and borders you need. First, you're going to look on page 2 if you're making the small quilt. In the first column, it will tell you the number of sashing pieces and the measurements on those. And then it's also going to tell you how many borders and the lengths on those. Now, if you remember, and way back when we cut out all of our fabrics for our blocks, I went ahead and cut my sashing and borders, so those are already ready for me. So all I had to do is start grabbing my blocks off the design wall, head to the sewing machine, and start attaching my sashing. So we'll do sashing first, and then we will do the outside borders. All right, so I apologize for a little bit of a glare on my extension table today. I have sunshine coming in through my window, and I'm telling you what, I am not going to complain, and I am not going to scare it off. So we're just going to have to deal with that. All right, so we have 3 different sizes of sashing on our design board waiting for us. We have the shorter ones, the longer ones, and then we have the vertical sashing, which is the entire length of the quilt top before the borders. So I have them kind of laid out in ascending order, so just by the length of each strip. The first thing we're going to do is just start putting together each column, and then we'll put our columns together with the vertical sashing, and then we'll put on our borders. So what I have done, and this would be a nice little tip and trick for you, is when you're doing a quilt top like this and you have a lot of blocks to keep track of, what I like to do is just stack the blocks together. Let me raise you up so you can actually see that. All right, so I've stacked the blocks together in order, and I'm going to just try to remember what goes where, right? The other thing I have done, which is a really good way to keep these things straight in your mind, is I have taken a picture of what the quilt top looked like on my design wall before I took it apart and brought it over to the sewing machine. That way, if I forget what block goes where, I have that for reference. So the first vertical sashing goes between the sage and the cottontail. So we're just going to sew this on to the sage. The cottontail is just going to kind of hang out here for a second. The second piece of vertical sashing is going between the moth and the cottontail sage block placement. So I'm just going to put that on there. I am not pinning my sashing onto the blocks. I am just keeping it finger pinched at the other end. When I get it started on this end, I just finger pinch the other end, and I'll just ease that sashing into the block. Now I like to do this with my sashing on top just because that is my solid piece of fabric. Now I am going to go ahead and cut my sage block off and get this sashing onto my cottontail block. Same concept as with the moth. Just going to get it started on one end. And you can see this is not straight at all right now, but it will be once I get it started and keep going along this path. And again, I just had a little finger pinch down here just to make sure those two corners match up correctly. Now I have been putting my sashing on the top, so I put it on the top of the moth and in between the cottontail and the sage. But so this will go on the top of the fawn. Again, just get it started. Take my sashing, pinch it on the other side of the block. Just keep it taut and sew it on. All right, now I can get my cottontail and my moth together. Now the cottontail goes up top, and then the cute little moth. So these will be sewn together. Same concept. I'm keeping my sashing strip on top just so I have that solid piece of fabric. And then pinching the other end and just kind of holding it. I'm not really stretching this. I'm just holding it so I can ease that fabric in all the way across this block. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave those the way they are. I know that the fawn goes on the bottom. So I'm going to start with the center column, which is just one piece of sashing, the crane and the puma. Okay, so you're going to notice this block is a little off right here. So I'm just going to lay this sashing across. And that's just going to become part of the seam allowance. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to trim it. It's fine. It's going to be fine. I do, however, need to get my iron plugged in. Okay, now this is the last piece of sashing for that first column, which is the cottontail moth and fawn. And the same thing here. I have a couple places where it's a little wiggly, but I'm just going to use that sashing to straighten up the block, and that excess is just going to work into the seam allowance. And yes, I could trim the blocks down and make sure they're perfectly square and straight before I did this, but I just don't. All right, so now we're going to add the little puma. I think that's the puma. Yep, the puma onto the crane block. Whoops, let me flip him over because I want my sashing on top. So now we have two columns together. I'm just going to lay those over on my cutting area just for right now. Well, one of them. The other one's going to be hanging out for a second. And now I have two more little guys to do. Now these I'm going to put on the bottom of the blocks just because, I don't know, I just am. So I have one for the coyote and one for the aloe, and then we'll start sewing those together. Okay, so this is where I'm going to deviate from the horizontal sashing, and I'm going to start working on the vertical sashing. Now, the vertical sashing is 30 inches long. That's a little more than I want to try to ease in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the vertical sashings, and I'm going to take this first column, I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to finger pinch and make a crease right here in the center of that column. And then I'm going to take the center of my sashing and line it up. So yes, I am going to pin something. Oh my goodness, I know you guys are shocked. So I'm going to pin the center. And I'm going to pin both ends. These are the Riley Blake Bluebird pins in case you are interested in finding them for yourself. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description box. And then I'm just going to kind of stretch these between, move that in, hold my finger. So I think I'm going to use 5 pins on this column. So 5 pins over 30 inches. Just because I don't want to have to ease 30 inches in. The other blocks were much smaller. Now I'm just going to put these little bluebird pins right here, and we'll sew this vertical sashing in. Yes, I did sew over that pen. They're very, very thin. So I'm not typically too concerned about that. And obviously I'm keeping the heads out of the way. Okay, so the reason I did that was because I want to be able to sew my aloe to my coyote, and I didn't want to have to cut my thread. So that's why I went ahead and did that vertical sashing. I could have put the sashing differently on these blocks and not had to cut the thread and just went with that, but this works just as well. All right, we're gonna do the same thing with the vertical sashing for the middle column. Again, I'm just gonna take this, fold it in half, do a little finger crease here so I know where halfway is. Lay my sashing strip down. Grab a few pins. All right, you may have noticed that I had a little bit of an issue getting over these seams right here for the puma ear, but it, a little extra oomph and then it's fine. All right, so I just need to add on the last block for this last column. So we're going to add the sashing to the cute little ringtail block. Again, sashing on top, just pinching the other side just like we did before. All right, so we do have all three of the columns put together at this point. So we just need to put our 3 columns together, and we're going to do the same thing for that. Again, we're just going to fold this column, this is the middle column, in half, do a little finger crease, and then we're going to match it up to the middle of the sashing. So I'm going to lay this down on my extension table. And I know where the center of my sashing is because I cut these sashing pieces on the fold. So it's like with a fabric. So it has that predefined little crease in it just from being on the fold. I don't think I told you that before, so that's just like a little trick. But obviously, no matter how you cut them, you can just take them and fold them in half and finger crease, and then you'll know where the center is. And I think this time I'm just going to put 3 pins in here because it's not that much length to be sewing. It's like 30 inches for this panel. Okay, so there's 2 of the columns, and now we just have to add our third. Again, we'll take the third column, fold it in half, do a little finger crease to find our middle, and then use the folded crease from the bolt to find the middle on the sashing. And then again, I'm just going to use 3 pins, top, middle, and end. Now this one is a little tricky just because the bulk of your quilt top is on the top and that one single column is on the bottom. So you'll just want to have to, just keep it lined up. And you might see, I kind of move my hand underneath here between the 2, and I will pull those fabrics into line if I need to. And when I say pull, I'm just really shifting. I'm not truly pulling anything. That's kind of hard to show on camera, the amount of pressure or whatever that I'm applying. But it really is just kind of adjusting it. It's not, I'm not pulling anything. Like right here, I want it to just shift that in a little bit just by giving it a little bit of a friction. All right, so now all of our sashing is done. We just have the outer border to put on, and then we can call this quilt top complete. A lot of quilts, you do the side borders and then you do the top and bottom. But on this pattern, they have you do top and bottom first and then the sides. So again, to find our center, I cut all of my borders on the fold as well. So I'm just going to, once again, fold it in half, do a little finger crease. Just my little finger crease right there. Take my top border, line that up, pin it in place, and then we'll sew it on. Same thing for the bottom, same thing for the sides. Now on my outer borders, I am going to do a back stitch here right before I get started, and I'll do that at the end as well. That's just going to help me when I go to long arm this to make sure that those outside seams stay nice and secure. All right, I'm going to press all of the sashing in the borders, and then we'll throw up on the design wall for a reveal. All right, here we have it. This is our finished baby quilt from the Delightful Desert pattern by Elizabeth Hartman. I am so happy with how this turned out. Now, full disclosure, I don't know if you guys noticed, but when I sewed my third column onto this top, it was upside down. So I had to take off this outside border, loosen the top and bottom borders, and get this out and do a lot of, a little de-stringing and turn that around and get it sewn back on. So just make sure you're watching the orientation of your blocks on those columns. You notice that I didn't use that many pens. This block, the finished size is about 30 by 34. So it's not that big of a little quilt top to put together, but definitely one that you want to take it slow and just get your piecing precise and have fun with it. Hey, if you decide to curate your own fabrics, have fun with that. If you decide to use one of the sets that she has put together for you in the pattern guide, it's going to turn out marvelously that way too. So it's truly up to you. This has been such a fun project for me to put together. There are a lot of little pieces and there are a lot of angles, but you can do it if you just follow the pattern guide, watch the way they're showing you to lay out your blocks and your pieces so you can just make sure all of those angles are correct. Now, looking back over this quilt, I would just say for me, the most difficult block was probably, which shouldn't have been, but it was probably the aloe plant. And I think it was just because I didn't keep track of my pieces very well on that. I didn't label my pieces as good as I should have. And then my angles were just not right. I had to cut a few pieces for that I just miscut. So that was probably the most difficult one for me. The one with the most pieces obviously was this great big crane block. And then next the fawn block. But you know, it wasn't that hard and it's definitely manageable. If you are taking this project on for the first time and you want a little help, make sure you check out the description box down below. I do have that project sheet for you. So whatever size you decide to take on, good luck and have fun with it. Take it slow. You can do this. It's not difficult. It is definitely manageable and you're going to have such a great finished project. So until next time, I hope you find joy in all you do. Carve out some time for crafting and creating. And remember, it's always better when you make stuff up.